Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Tina Austin, AI ethics advocate and educator at USC and UCLA, whose talent for making complex AI concepts accessible has helped students and faculty critically evaluate artificial intelligence while preparing for tomorrow. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have on Tina Austin, who is one of the rising stars when it comes to people who communicate and educate people about AI. There's been a number of people that have come to the fore that have had a real talent for talking about AI in a way that's approachable and also educating people about it. She is an AI ethics advocate and biomedical research who is teaching at both USC and UCLA. Now, having gone to UCLA Law School and knowing of the rivalry between the two, I'll have to ask her how she manages to balance that. She's also been honored as an ASU GSV top leading woman in AI this year. And she is doing an immense amount of work. I just talked to her beforehand about working full-time positions at both, and I need to see how she was able to juggle that. But Tina, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me here. It's an honor to be here on your podcast and spending Friday evening with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Where are you at right now?
I'm in LA, close distance from both universities, but LA, you can't get anywhere within 20 minutes. So it's still like an hour from each university.
I grew up in LA. I live in Vancouver, Canada now, but I lived in LA my whole life. And as we both know, even though it's equidistant from both, it's probably an hour and a half to get to either one.
And especially rush hour. So I tend to ask for my classes to be in the middle of the day so I can go during lunchtime and then, meet students and then do most of my other work remote and AI work as well. That's a whole separate thing that I've been juggling the past couple of years.
So you'd mentioned that you were working full time at both universities teaching students about AI. And by the way, to think critically about science, society, and responsible use of AI. And how did you do that? What was that like?
It wasn't something that I initially asked for or something that I predicted I was going to get. My background, as you mentioned to your audience, it was biomedical research and deconstructing papers for my audience. So my students at the time, we'd bring in a paper, we'd dive into the details and break it down for them. And before that, I used to work in industry where I would break down complex topics between, for example, doctors and practitioners and lab managers to a broader audience that, for example, patients or companies that needed to understand the science, the complex science. So with the rise of generative AI, the past couple of years, I've thought it was interesting to bring it into my classroom as a topic where students can critically evaluate AI outputs. And so that translated into being invited to teach other courses that could use that AI. One thing led to another. And as I mentioned last quarter, it got to a point where while teaching at UCLA, I got some classes to teach at USC and develop a new course. And now developing more faculty workshops because there's such a need for this right now. And not everyone is a data scientist or, not everyone has had experience working across different fields. So in a way, it kind of made me more of a generalist working across 3 different disciplines. And I'm hoping that now that I've gotten to do all that, I can focus more on helping out faculty, which is what I've also been doing last year. And as you mentioned, it with ASU GSV, I was there at the conference while having to go from one thing to another. So I'm hoping that this year I can make it more focused towards helping out faculty.
So what was the course that you were teaching at USC and UCLA?
At different times, different courses, but at UCLA, the past year I've been in computational biology. So it's breaking down concepts like programming for computational bio students. So they learn things like how AlphaFold works, how protein prediction models are like, and also learning some coding language. Not all students have background in programming or coding. And I was also teaching a class with some humanities folks on AI and biases and biases with gender. That's where I brought in the Notebook LM. I don't know if you saw my post with the podcasters and the male podcaster, female podcaster, and she was always surprised. These are things my students picked up on in that class. But then at USC, I was focusing on just critical thinking with AI, and the entire time we were building the plane as we flew it, like it was something, a new paper had just come out. We would try out, for example, as you saw, the prompts with like please and thank you, or prompts with how to build agents, or how to build their own custom GPTs, and see where it can help them find a job in tomorrow's market, which is, nobody knows what that is. And if anyone tells you they know what tomorrow's gonna be like, I wouldn't agree that anyone knows about the future, but it was something that students told me they appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been teaching a little myself at Suffolk Law School, and there's definitely some anxiety with students right now about what does it mean for their job prospects, and you can't blame them. Like they have a lot riding on this. They've invested a lot in their education, and it's going to affect them how things play out. So one of the things that you've been working on is modeling proteins with large language models. How does that work?
One of the lectures in my class was talking about the differences between protein language models and large language models. And so, what they are is just AI models that are trained on protein sequences, and they're different from AlphaFold. And so, in the class, I wanted students to learn that it's not just ChatGPT, where it reads and predicts words, and protein language models, on the other hand, they can predict the amino acid sequences that make up the proteins that we all have, in our bodies and we consume and work with. So it was really exciting for my students to learn the impact and the potential of computational biology and large language models, and then protein language models to help predict protein structure and function. And what it does is it just reduces trial and error experiments in the lab.
So do you yourself have a background in computer programming? Was that part of your work in biomedical research, or?
Yeah, a little bit. It wasn't originally. Again, I got drawn into this by just working more on it, and then being invited to teach certain courses because students told me and faculty told me this was something they really appreciated. Because one of the first objections to you get from, let's say, a department that teaches science would be, well, this is all generative AI. It's just creative, right? And it's a creative tool. So where would that be helpful in science?
Mm.
And science is about accuracy, it's about repetition, and it's about facts. It's, not like, in Gen AI, with Gen AI, you can make up an essay or write, create an image. Science is not about any of that. However, when we talk about the Nobel Prize winners from last year, one of them was the person behind, I believe, AlphaFold. And so that was important for students to know and understand that, yes, it does cross paths with science. And it's not just like I've heard people talking about some outliers with AlphaFold where it's not always 100% accurate. And of course, nothing is always 100%. But if it saves time in the lab, then it can be helpful to scientists.
And I think that's a challenge that comes up in the legal world where I come from, because it's the same problem. Lawyers sometimes don't look past the not 100%. And to see the gains and advantages and speed that it offers to get more quickly to what they actually are looking for. I do want to get into a little bit though, like how you how you got to where you're at now, because this is just an amazing moment in history to like have technology, AI evolving the way it is, and to be able to understand where it's going, what it's about right now, and communicate it to people in ways that they could help themselves, really. But what was the genesis for this? I want to get into a little bit about what your early influences are, like what your environment was like growing up. Did you grow up in Los Angeles?
No, I actually grew up in Northern Ireland, and I had to, and this is weird, but I had to learn different accents, and that was you saw with one of my experiments. I trained tested AI with different accents.
Yeah.
So I had a Northern Irish accent when I was a kid because my parents, they were studying at the time there, and so I had to I really wanted to blend in and wanted to, be like the other kids, and so I learned regional accents because my parents were always moving around, and so I had to learn to blend in from one region to another region and then always be ready to pack and move and do something else. And I think in a weird way, that's kind of prepared me for where I'm at now is always being ready to change. And I don't feel like I've arrived at any particular destination. I'm grateful that you think I've somehow like I'm in a special, amazing place. I think if anything, this is another transient sort of situation where because AI is evolving so fast, who knows where either of us are going to be in a year from now. I really think that it's changing the job market and changing job roles. And as an instructor, especially, you have to be ready for change. Although, just because I've done it doesn't mean that every instructor probably can. I know a couple of colleagues that, are close to retirement or they're like, no, we've done this the old way and we're going to continue doing it this way. And that's totally fine. I don't think everybody should be ready to change. But for me, my story's been all about trying to change and trying to keep up. And in a way, that's kind of made me ready for some of these workshops because I remember I did one last week with Cassandra on you've probably seen her on LinkedIn. And it was about custom GPTs, and people were just asking questions on the fly, like, hey, I'm a history professor, or I'm teaching this topic. How can you build one? And so we were able to, like, I was able to build one like, immediately right there and then. And then someone said, well, that's interesting how quickly you're able to adapt to this and build things on the fly. And that's sort of become a specialty that I didn't ask for. It just
Would you say some of that came from your parents? Like what kind of work did they do?
My parents were engineers. They wanted me to get into engineering. I had a good math background. They were very disappointed when I switched to, especially not that, both of them, but my dad in particular. He was like, "No, you need to stay in engineering." And I had just loved biology. I loved the story of Dolly the sheep. When I had to make it simple for my classmates and to understand how cloning works, that was, I think, the day that I turned to my parents and said, "No, I'm just gonna I wanted to study biology or at least explaining it." I loved explaining complex things to broad audiences.
Hmm.
And that was the moment I think I just went into biology, not necessarily thinking I want to get into med school or any kind of grad school. It was just mostly the concepts and breaking them down was something I enjoyed. And then I guess sometimes life puts you through different things so you realize that what your strengths are or what are some things that you can do that you love. For me, it was I worked in a lab for a long time and realized that my passion was really mostly explaining the science and breaking it down rather than being the one holding the pipette in the lab and doing the experiments.
Was there an experience where you realized that was something you wanted to do or had the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, when I worked for a small startup, I remember the startup, they were just again, they were also building the plane as they fly it. I realized quickly that between one department and another, they weren't communicating with each other as much, or they were helping out cancer patients, but they didn't know exactly like what was the science, or why is manufacturing doing this in this way, or why is this other department doing science in this other way. So I volunteered to do a lunch and learn for the whole company. And after that, I got so much positive feedback. Hey, can you send me those slides? Or hey, can you show me? Like, again, that was so helpful. Now I know what my job here is.
Yeah.
And so that was a moment for me realizing A, what am I good at? And B, what are some areas like I can help other people with that. And so that was when I took another job, which was just like traveling but explaining things. Then that led to moving to the East Coast. I lived there, but immediately got a job at a community college and really liked community college, and then moved back to LA. And I taught at Caltech, then UCLA, and then back at Caltech, and still at UCLA, and then US.
Was it in California that you started, or?
Yeah, yeah, in California. Yeah, so, I mean, California has a lot of diverse culture. I really appreciate that about Southern California. You didn't feel like you needed to necessarily blend in as you would in somewhere that's remote where I grew up. I would be more of the outsider looking person as opposed to, Southern California, you have a blend of cultures, you have a blend of people with different accents. There's more acceptance. I feel that at least back when I was younger and in Northern Ireland, there was not as much diversity, and it was around the time of lots of things happening up there with, I'm sure you know about the IRA and the fights and things like that. So, yeah. It's
Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Okay, well, it sounds like you had a fascinating background in science, and then finding your way to being a communicator
Mhm.
of ideas across different disciplines. And that obviously had applicability to what's going on now. I'm curious though, like the transition to teaching. What inspired you to become a professor and to teach?
My audience, my students, like I said, originally it was the people at the company that really liked listening to my talks. And then, when I moved to the East Coast and thought I just gonna do this community college thing for a couple of months, it became a full-time thing, and I really loved seeing students come back at after class or during class telling me, like, they really understood something now. I guess maybe that comes back to, helping, my siblings learn how to also adjust to different environments, and you just become, the unofficial teacher in the house. The real life happens, and then you love explaining things and breaking it down for colleagues and friends. And as you see with LinkedIn, there's sometimes a paper that might be misinterpreted by a group. And then so I'm really interested in, let me break this down and look into what might have been missed, or if there's another way to look at something. And I kind of stumbled on that unintentionally because there's so much viral news these days, right? You see there's,
Yeah. Mhm.
this paper about brain rot, or this paper about how AI is being used, in Africa or somewhere, right? And then you go and look at it and like, oh wait, this one thing may have been missing from the title. Because there's always people that are going to hype it up and make it more viral. But in the process of doing that, there's all those tiny details that are not going viral, and they make all the story 100% different. So,
So let's jump into that a little bit. The work that you've been doing in education, like teaching people about AI and these concepts, because that critical thinking is something that people are very much talking about right now, and whether or not You had mentioned the brain rot spin that people have taken on AI, that it's, in a way like hindering, especially young people that are going through university about thinking critically. Is there anything in that, or do you think that probably it really depends on how you use it?
Mhm. Oh yeah. I mean, the story was never about one thing that if you every time you use it, you're going to rot your brain, which is unfortunately the narrative that we hear all the time. The story was about, I believe, 19 or so participants that were just tested on one essay exam that had, they went from one thing to another. And the last group, they were the group that didn't have exposure to AI and then had AI, then used AI, and they did better than the other two groups. That's not the narrative that's being spread. It's the one where they looked at the brain scan, and I don't know where in the story someone decided to use the term brain rot, where the authors themselves were like, "No, we we shouldn't put that in there, and that's clickbait, and that's not accurate." But in a way, the authors have gotten a lot of press too for this. I'm connected with them on LinkedIn, and they're going places doing talks about this. And I've also seen an interview with them where they were interviewed by Time, I believe, and they were asked, "Well, if it was a preprint, why did you release it so early?" And they're right that, if they wait another year, things in AI change so fast. Like between now and another year, who knows where we'll be. I mean, I only started posting things on LinkedIn a year ago, and I didn't have any. I had like maybe 10, I knew maybe 10 people on LinkedIn. So things change.
Yeah, they have been changing very quickly. I know that people have concerns about the critical thinking. There's obviously the other concern that people have about AI taking their jobs. And there's various news stories that have come up with different executives essentially taking like an AI first approach to employees. Like, well, first, can AI do this? And if not, and only if not, do we look at human employees? And that, is starting to bubble up. I'm curious though, like what your thoughts are about the whole taking jobs narrative.
Oh, I'm very concerned about that. I mean, this is something I've been concerned about right away when, we were testing this in the classroom 2.5, 3 years ago with the ability, and of course, there's companies that are always going to want to, if they can save money and use AI and not have a human do the work, of course they're going to choose that option. But I'm less concerned when I see the way things have been implemented. And I'm sure you've also noticed some companies have received backlash for putting AI into their product, and people don't like it. It makes sense. Like it's the same as seeing like an AI generated image or an AI generated something on your feed. It's a few might think it's funny or amusing, but overall, I think nobody is nobody's that impressed with a product that is just, is likely to make mistakes. Or why not use a human? Why not pay someone? When I see people on YouTube, they're, instead of using stock photos, they'll just use an AI photo or AI video. They get backlash. So I'm in a way glad that there's some pushback against that. So that shows that it's not going to be all AI. But there's of course companies that are happy to do that, and you've seen many layoffs lately with big companies. So it is a concern.
I mean, related to that, sometimes people have a response to it about Jevons paradox and the fact that when you make something much more efficient to access, that it also increases the demand. Like, well, I guess with electricity being made so abundant, that people use it more, not less, you know? And so the idea is that if the cost of AI gets driven down, which it seems to be the case, that every year the prior model that was available gets cheaper, that if intelligence is essentially like AI, not human intelligence, gets driven down, that it'll be more likely to be used by people more extensively, and that might lead to more jobs actually, because there'll be more things that we could look into and we can tackle that we haven't been able to in the past. Do you buy into that, or do you think that
I think it's a little bit more nuanced than this. I wouldn't say that applies to every discipline, every field, every job. We, like my students and I, we looked at let's say 5 or 6 jobs just for evaluating how this could go with AI into it. Like there's some jobs, for example, you're never going to replace a hairdresser with AI or
Right.
a robot, or a plumber or someone. One of my students, she aspired to be a dancer. She does professional dancing, like, and she was thinking, well, I'm concerned it could come and replace, she was looking at gigs where she would go to a place and she was worried about that even and I thought, well, I don't think that could be a concern, but she was outlining, no, these are all the ways it could affect my job. And do she's a choreographer and she has to think about, for example, different moves. That was just one
Mm.
student in particular, but I just don't think it applies to every single job. I mean, some people in IT, like what you're describing, to me it sounds like it would be great to free up time for some professions. Even with teaching, it doesn't always apply to everyone's case. For me, it applied when I was doing teaching 4 different classes at 2 different universities. It was helpful to get a little bit of time so I could focus on other things. And the way I use it is very different from it's very unconventional. It's not like outsource any of my lesson planning or outsource any of my quizzes. It's more like in terms of organizing certain tasks. Whereas to another teacher or a professor, it might sound like, oh, she's just outsourcing her assignments or work. It's not the case. And you have to really know what works and when to put it aside in order to really save time. There was another paper that came out, I believe, a month ago, and it argued that teachers are going to save time. But the paper, and I think I deconstructed that one as well. There were some missing nuances there. So back to your point, it depends.
Well, that's a very lawyerly response. Um,
Yeah.
One thing I definitely want to ask you while we have time is about the role of AI in education, because that is something that absolutely everyone, including myself, colleagues that teach, are trying to figure out. Like, one concern is students will have AI write their papers. And then, initially there was that pushback, well, like we're going to try to like identify the ones that do and then reject them or hold it to some kind of plagiarism type of standard. Others are like, hey, if it's a good paper, I judge it based upon the actual communication, like the actual content of the paper, not the origin of the paper. And so there's that thing about how students learn and how that
Mhm.
works. But then there's the other part about just what interventions that we take as educators are more effective with AI. It used to be just, like the talking head lecture. It used to be maybe showing them practical examples or something. But like, I think it would be invaluable to have your insight as to those two things.
Great question. I love this question. It's very detailed. One of the things I recently came up with to solve this problem was this Unbloom's method that I'm sure you saw I posted about as well. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, right? It's a
Oh, okay.
step-by-step way to help someone who's doing lesson planning to go from understanding and then all the way you go up to critical thinking at the top where you create. And now in the day and age of AI kind of does all that or some of that for you. So it might even start at the top of that pyramid. So all of this now has to change in the age of AI. And in other words, some of my writing colleagues have proposed the idea of flipped blooms. So that's just turning it upside down. And when I looked at it in different fields like STEM or humanities, flipped blooms doesn't always apply. It may work really well for writing classes. So let's say for a STEM class, you would have to design a different approach to make sure that the student is learning that it's not just cognitive offloading, right? And there's so much research done about cognitive offloading when it comes to AI. So one of the things I proposed was this unblooms method where you apply AI completely differently in a different discipline. I made a custom bot for it. I'm happy to share that with you at the end, or if folks want to try it out and let me know, because it's still in early phases. I'm still trying to get feedback from as many instructors as possible, and really look for where can you use AI in the classroom critically, and not use AI by like pushing a button, but how do you have your students evaluate it? I've had in different classes had different approaches for bringing in a tool only after they first understood some concepts in the class, then had them evaluate it, or then I had them reflect on something where, something that AI would not be able to do in the classroom. One of the other things that AI can't really do well is evaluate AI. So we had students evaluate the responses that AI gave and reflect on it. This was again something that AI is not really good at. With even if you program an agent, last week agent came out, and you can have agent go like open your windows and like make your PowerPoint. And so one of the things I did actually with my Caltech students 2.5 years ago was we looked at all of these PowerPoint generated by AI, and all the weaknesses, all the areas of improvement. And I have now a lot of data and information from these different courses that I've taught, which I think can lend itself to like workshops that I've been doing, and the future of AI in education. It's messy, it's not clear cut, but it is very exciting, because this is where I think there's an opportunity to really revolutionize teaching, not just catch someone who wants to cheat, because that's something that's always been a concern. And I'm not saying that people won't use it or haven't used it to cheat, but where's the opportunity is the question I'm asking.
And there certainly is a lot of opportunity. It's just about finding the right application of it. One thing about students that I tell them is that there's a lot of opportunity in kind of like this arbitrage between those who are familiar and savvy about AI and those who aren't. And actually, because we're in this transitional phase right now, like it gives them a lot of ability to be that translator between those worlds and be very valuable because of that. Because there's a lot of employers right now that are looking out towards what's happening with AI and thinking actually that the students, the people that they're hiring on, are going to be the ones that are going to be helping them understand and get ahead of it.
I agree. I mean, sometimes a lot of these, like I said, in my experiments in the classroom, the students were the ones who found the issues, who it was part of their assignment, to be fair. I gave them
Yeah.
this tool, and not really the tool, sometimes mostly like the output of the tool. And they had to evaluate every single thing that was off or different. And in the process of doing that, they realized that, oh, wait, I was before using this as a therapist, or I was before using this as like a companion. And I was surprised actually when I did a survey in my class of 160 students to see how many students are using AI as a companion. And it was shocking that I still had about 25 to 30%. And this was like last year, not even before the rise of what we're seeing with Meta right now, and people getting marketed to these companions. So after doing these tests, they can realize these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, this is where they can come in, because that's the important part. That's when you prepare students for the job market. Where's the advantage? Where can they really shine? And does it really help them if they use a AI resume generator?
I think you're doing such a wonderful job getting out there and helping students to understand how this works, how it, presents some challenges, but at the same time, a lot of opportunities. So I do want to ask you a couple of questions I ask of all my guests. One is clearly, you know, working at and teaching at different institutions, there's a lot going on. You said you had two universities, but four different classes. How do you balance that?
Yeah, so I was doing that. I'm not doing that like going forward, because it was good. It was good to do. It was definitely something I appreciated, that, two opportunities came across at the same time. I realized that I could lend my expertise more to what I was doing it with conferences and workshops and helping the broader community. So I like to balance efficiency with what makes the most sense. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but I like to still go out and do my yoga classes and still be able to have time to really think about how AI is evolving. It's really important to give yourself time to really reflect on these developments, and I find that that's the important part, the nuance, the detail. And if you're just filling up your calendar with multiple, let's say, teaching commitments or jobs, you may miss out on those small things that nobody, will stop you and say, "Wait, did you notice that there was this one tiny thing that if you use this prompt differently or this tool differently, and because you're just going from one place to another," which is what I was doing, you might miss it. So I'm hoping that for me going forward, I can, do more of that work-life balance that you're describing.
Yeah, it's always important to take time for yourself, time for people that you care about. AI can't replace that. Which leads me to the last question that I have for you. In doing all this and doing all the work that you're doing, what makes it worthwhile for you?
Well, I can't flip my camera around, but I have a whole wall of thank you letters from my former students and kind notes from them, and realizing that I was able to help even be a small part of their journey to where they wanted to be. And now I get to say that my students are not just the ones that are going to med school or grad school, but some of them are faculty that are already professors that are already, you never get to see the full outcome of your work or the full impact of your work in this line of career. So what makes it worthwhile is knowing that you've been able to help even one person or two do something differently and it helped them. So, workshops, faculty come back at the end and say, "Wow, that really changed my thinking in my course, and now I'm able to do this differently." I get so many letters from faculty now, in addition to former students. This was not something I used to get up until a year ago. And so, what makes it worthwhile is knowing that now you've had a broader impact beyond just your little classroom, which is what I set myself out to do 2 years ago in my, I guess, smaller world of molecular biology. And yeah, that's what makes it worthwhile. And being able to work with people like yourself and meet wonderful people like yourself and be on these podcasts and finally have a voice in this community. It was something that I never thought would be possible. So this all makes it worthwhile.
That's a wonderful legacy and an amazing contribution. And thank you for contributing your voice to everything.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Also, just by the way, you're working on a book that's going to come out sometime. And then,
Yes.
well, I'm definitely looking forward to that, and let me know where to buy it.
I'm excited for that as well. It's something in the works the past year and a half, so I'll give you the details soon. Thank you.
Cool. And so, for everyone who's watching that would like to learn more about you and keep in touch, how can they do that?
Yes, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. It's really straightforward, just Tina Austin. And I think there's a few Tina Austins, but if you just put Tina Austin AI or Tina Austin ASU or something, you'll find it.
Well, thank you for that, and I highly encourage you all to follow Tina. She is doing some great work out there. For all of you who've stuck around, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.